Teamwork isn't just nice to have in business, it's the undisputed competitive advantage. When your team members work as a unified force, your whole operation benefits through higher productivity, thriving creativity, and unstoppable momentum. Welcome to the Impactful Teamwork podcast, where we share with you strategies and tactics to help you develop game-changing teams so that you and your business can make a real difference in the world. I am delighted to welcome you to another edition of Impactful Teamwork. And on the last few podcasts, we've been talking about the importance of teamwork, knowing your role in the herd, why we need diverse teams. But one area that we haven't yet touched on that is a key foundational pillar of teamwork is actually the performance of the leader. Because great teams don't happen unless we have great leaders. So today I wanted to delve into the importance of this. And I wanted to share with you something that came through to me recently on an email. And I thought it was just such a great example. And I will put the graphic of this in the show notes for you, because it really explains brilliantly why leaders are so important. And this gentleman, he's a gentleman by the name of Simon Bowen, and he also goes by the name of the founder of the models method. And I came across his work through a colleague recently, and I absolutely love what he does. And I will try and get him on the show at some point in the future. But I think he sums up so well when he says here, when a group of business owners get together, the conversation invariably turns to the issues of staffing and teams. I think we can all probably agree that. And the performance management and recruitment pressures and challenges involved in having a team, they often dominate the discussion. And I know there's so many times when I've met with business owners and business leaders, and all they can do is kind of berate their team and complain about what their team's not doing. We rarely hear conversations about the power of the team and how much more leverage the business is, or how extraordinary the customer experience is as a result of the team. And as I've shared with you before, this is why I think teamwork is this undisputed competitive superpower out there, because people just don't talk about all the great things that come from teamwork. But the reality is, of any business that's growing better than average, it's because of the brilliance of the team, not in spite of it. But that also means that it's because of the brilliance of the business owner or the business leader, not in spite of it. And Simon shares this great model. And the model, for those of you who want to draw it, it's effectively a square. And throughout the square is a cross in the middle. So we've got 4 different squares. And one dimension is brilliance of the business owner, and the other is for the brilliance of the team. So in situations where both the owner and the team are in the failure mode, the business will experience failure squared. So we've got poor business owner, business leader, and a failing team, we have failure squared. Then we see situations where we've got a brilliant leader, but a team failure. And then we see brilliant failure. And this is where there's enormous opportunities that are wasted. And then the contra of that is where we see team brilliance, but owner failure. And this is where we see failed brilliance. So enormous potential that is wasted. But the sweet spot is where we see the brilliance from both the team and the owner. And that's where we see brilliance squared. A disproportionate capacity to outthink, outsell, and outserve the marketplace. And I just thought this was just such a great depiction of how important a leader is to the team. Because as I said, I'm going to share you an example of that in the show notes. So what makes a great leader? I call these great leaders unbridled leaders. And they recognize that leadership is more about who you are, your character, rather than about what you do, your competency. It's about being rather than doing. And I often talk about the difference between leadership and management. So great leaders be and managers do. And I think increasingly what I see today's society is that leadership is now everyone's job. When we look at a herd of horses, everyone steps into the role of leader as and when it's appropriate. And we've touched in some other episodes about the importance of shared leadership within an organization. So as leaders, we need to think about changing our thinking in order to change our behavior. Because we are only really going to create this systemic and sustainable change in organizations when leaders change their thinking about the way that we need to lead and run businesses. And when leaders really model authenticity and congruency. You might remember that's the C of the ABCD leadership model. So what really makes a successful leader? And I've kind of been researching and studying this now for, over a decade probably. And I think there's 16 attributes that great leaders need to embody in order to be successful and have an impact on the business. And these 16 attributes, because now you know how I love acronyms, spell out the word courageous impact. So I believe that leaders need to lead with courageous impact. So what do all the letters of courageous impact stand for? And I have for you, I created a quiz to help you assess what your level of courageous impact is. I'll give you the URL now, which is unbridledbusiness.net/leadership quiz. Again, that will be in the show notes, but it's on unbridledbusiness.net/leadership quiz. So therefore you can find out how you rate on the 16 attributes of courageous leaders. But let's just delve into what each one means. So C stands for clarity of vision and confronts reality head on. Because business leaders today can no longer stick their head in the sand like an ostrich and ignore what's happening around them. But also, looking at business through rose-colored spectacles is also dangerous. This pace of relentless change means that unbridled leaders need to continually confront the facts about the state of their organization and their business. And of course, things like big data and intelligent dashboards and KPI can really, really help a business leader see what is happening in all areas of the business. And then armed with that information, business leaders can make better decisions. And so lead the team and the business to even greater levels of success. But there's a caveat around this too. The business leader must be self-aware and willing to let go of any preconceived ideas they had about how the business should evolve. Because data is always right and it's always wrong. And you really need to ensure with all this data out there that you are interpreting it in the right context, because without a sense check, dire decisions can be made, especially if the data is made to corroborate some previous information. And I love data. In my former corporate role, I did a lot of data analysis and I was a bit of a big data geek in those days. And it was amazing how all the data I was collecting could easily be manipulated to tell the story that people wanted it to tell. So let me share for you an example. I used to run a survey where I collected data from all the health clubs, the major health clubs, with people like Cannons and Esporta and David Lloyd, people like that across the UK. And we were collecting that data every single month and talking about how membership levels were increasing or decreasing and pricing and that in all of these members clubs. And I put out a press release one day which talked about the number of people at these health clubs, the membership levels were declining. And it was picked up by a mainstream newspaper that basically started implying that the British public were lazy and they weren't working out, and that's why membership numbers were declining at these health clubs. The thing was, there was a huge piece of information missing. And that was that I was only surveying a tranche of the membership clubs, the fitness clubs that were membership only in places, like I said, Esporta, David Lloyd's, Cannons, places like that. What it didn't show, and I don't even know today what the data would have shown, was people that were maybe going to council-run gyms, people going to just gyms that maybe just did one activity, like a boxing gym or something like that. It also didn't show and make any reference to the number of people that might be working out at home and had foregone a gym membership in order to buy their own equipment and work out at home. So the hypothesis that the British public were being lazy and not working out simply wasn't true from that data, because that data was just looking at a slice of information. But it's amazing how this data can get distorted if that's what you want to do with it. So really important that the first attribute here of great leaders is that they have this clarity of vision and they confront reality head on and really pay attention to what the data is really saying and not what they hope the data is saying. The O of courageous is having open and honest conversations. It's really important as leaders that we speak our truth and are comfortable having open and honest conversations with team members. Authentic communications means saying what has to be said, because no one likes confrontation, but as we've mentioned before, actually confrontation is very healthy. And the problem is if we don't have these conversations, I like to call them courageous conversations, we don't address issues, they remain unresolved and they become very toxic. And that can cause a real threat to your business's performance. So a great example of this is taking swift action to reassign or exit an underperforming team member. Difficult to do initially, but in my experience, makes a massive difference. And I've shared before what Zappos do. Zappos, the American shoe retailer, that once they've hired you after 30 days, they give you the option, they actually pay you to leave because they don't want people working in their organization that are going to negatively impact it. So that's just an example of having a difficult conversation and deciding, well, is this person the right person for the organization? If it's not, let's decide to part ways right now. The U of courageous is urge team members to challenge the status quo. So many business leaders feel the pressure to have all of the answers because they've not embraced the concept of shared leadership. And they can feel uncomfortable showing their vulnerability when they don't have all of the answers. And the irony here is that it is our vulnerability that magnetizes team members to us. And by encouraging constructive dissent and healthy debate, you can actually reinforce the strength of the team and demonstrate that in the detention of diverse opinions, there lies a better answer. But only that only ever happens if you've managed to create this psychological safety and remove the fear from the environment so that team members feel comfortable to speak up and say what needs to be said. The R of courageous stands for respect others' opinions. So all business leaders, we all have blind spots that impact the way we interact with others. So unfiltered 360-degree feedback is not always easy to hear, but it can breathe new life into a relationship and your leadership style if you listen and importantly act on that information. I think one of the challenges that I see is 360-degree feedback is great, but it only really works if there's a high degree of trust in the organization and team members feel that they won't be punished for their honest feedback. And this is why often these surveys are done anonymously. And I think there's a great shame in that because there's so much we can learn from individuals who give us feedback, but often people don't feel comfortable within an organization to do that, which is why they are anonymous. The A of courageous stands for acknowledge others. So as business leaders, it's imperative that we let go of our own personal need for praise and instead give credit to those around us. And I remember this early on in my career because I was like, well, what happens if I don't get all the praise? Won't I feel irrelevant? But I think there's a great thing about leadership that a great leader make sure in times when things go well, the leader gives all their praise and recognition to their team and values them and cheers them on, but they take the blame when things don't go so well. And there's a lovely quote I want to share with you here. It's a Nelson Mandela quote, which I just think is amazing. It's better to lead from behind and put others in front, especially when you celebrate victory and when nice things occur. You take the front line when there's danger. Then people will appreciate your leadership. And I think that just sums up so well what we're talking about today about courageous leadership. So that was the A for acknowledge others. The G in courageous stands for galvanize change and go for it. Because in fear-based environments, it's all about protecting the status quo and surviving. But this model really doesn't serve us very well in this era of collaboration. And I think great leaders understand that in an environment of relentless change, the leadership paradigm is changing. And it's time to galvanize reinvention in our teams and business cultures. And indeed, that PwC survey said that 45% of CEOs believe that they will need to reinvent their businesses within the next 10 years. So unbridled leaders need to be solution orientated and lead from the front, setting the direction and encouraging full participation, because this change won't be easy. It's likely to be messy, and we need team members to adapt and be fluid and flexible to go with the change. And when we're going for change, we do need to have really clear clarity of direction, at least for the next few steps. And then have some data dashboards and KPIs and business metrics so that we can figure out whether what we are trying to achieve is working, or do we need to take the feedback? Do we need to pivot and go in a different direction? Some of you might remember on the ABCDE model of leadership, the D stands for direction. As leaders, we need to have this clarity of direction. We need to go for it, but we also need to be humble enough to realize that sometimes that direction needs to change because the environment is changing so quickly, and then we need to try another tact. The E of courageous stands for establish a culture of innovation. We want to create a culture where team members don't feel afraid to speak up, because this is what promotes innovation. When I was working in London, it never ceased to amaze me how much creativity my team had and innovative solutions they could come up with if I just created the space for that to happen. And because they could see the business from a different perspective, they often came up with solutions to things and problems I had been grappling with for days and weeks to solve. And I believe that encouraging team members to speak up when systems and processes aren't working develops a true partnership in the business, where everyone contributes to the success of the business and where everyone feels engaged and motivated. And alongside this culture of innovation, it's also really important to emphasize that your business is a learning environment, because there's no learning unless we experiment. And if team members are afraid to experiment and innovate, they will never come up with new ideas. They'll be stuck in this fear. So we want to create a culture where actually we celebrate failure when things happen and make sure that team members learn from it so it doesn't happen again. And our challenge as leaders, of course, is to ensure that any of these failure points aren't so significant that they might take the business completely out of operation, as happened in the case of Barings Bank, where one of their team members was misappropriating funds, and the result of that was it resulted in the collapse of the business. So as business leaders, we need to make sure that the level of failure is proportionate to what we need to happen in the business. The O of courageous stands for opportunistic. There's a real challenge right now if this information overload that can create analysis paralysis. And actually, this inability to make a decision, in fact, is as bad, and I might even virtue to offer worse than making the wrong decision. Because when we don't make a decision, we leave the business in a state of flux with no direction, and that's really destabilizing. So a great leader sees the business opportunities, commits to making the decision, and then maintains the momentum, takes the feedback, and then recalibrates and moves forward again. The U of courageous is about understanding themselves, their strengths and their weaknesses. So great business leaders, the unbridled leaders that I refer to, know their strengths and weaknesses and surround themselves with people who are better than they are. They prioritize their team members' time so that the bulk of it is spent on activities they love and they can be trusted to deliver. So they really ensure that team members are in flow as much as possible, because this then avoids procrastination and poor performance. And these courageous leaders keep the lines of communication open, even when they don't know the answers. They don't hide behind jargon, but they use straight talk, and they're not afraid to say, I don't know, and share that vulnerability. And they share information for the good of the organization because they know this won't be used to sabotage their performance, because there's this level of psychological safety within the culture that's been created. The S of courageous stands for share the leadership. And as many of you know, I'm a massive proponent of shared leadership, because it means acknowledging that as a leader, you no longer have to have all the answers to everything. Long gone are the days where the one person at the top of the leadership pyramid had all the answers. In today's rapid, interconnected world, the leader simply can't know everything. And shared leadership works when everyone's aligned with the same vision for the business and there's no ego in the organization. And everyone's working towards the same goal with the same level of commitment. And each team member is focused on working on their specific area of expertise and superior business performance, both in terms of profitability and productivity results. So that was courageous. And then the impact, the I stands for intuition and integrity. So integrity is when our words and deeds are consistent with our intentions. And the most common display of a lack of integrity in business is when a leader says what others want them to hear rather than the truth. So integrity needs to be a guiding foundation for team members to trust the direction the leader chooses is for the good of them all. And the importance of telling the truth and being in integrity can safeguard reputations, your own and the team's and that of the business. Because in my experience, people appreciate mistakes happen, but it's how you handle them that makes all the difference. And intuition is that gut feeling, that inner knowing of what you need to know. Sometimes you just feel it. You just know what you need to do. And there's kind of sometimes no rational explanation for the decision, but you just know what you need to do. And the latest neuroscience has demonstrated that we have a brain in our heart and another in our intestines, our gut. And what we found is that in each of these, there is an extensive mass of neurons that behave in a fashion similar to the neurons contained in the brain. And these neurons in the gut and the heart actually have been shown to work faster than the neurons in the brain. So actually, our body is actually telling us what to do. It's sending a signal to the brain that's then interpreting that and telling us what to do. And this is why it's so important to listen to our gut feelings. The problem is, as a society, we've learned not to pay attention to this. And because it's so much easier to let our head lead the way. So great leaders understand that importance of listening to our intuition and being in integrity. The M of impact stands for model the way, because the most important personal quality people look for and admire in a leader is their personal credibility. Credibility is the foundation of leadership. And if people don't believe in the messenger, they won't believe the message. Titles may be granted, but leadership is earned. So leaders model the way by finding their voice and setting a great example. They do what they say and they say what they do. And it's when leaders fail to model the way and walk the talk that team members feel that there's a lack of integrity. And how do we notice a lack of integrity in an organization? Well, it can take various forms, but it can be things like the organization is asking team members to change, and yet those at the top leaders are not exhibiting this. So we're not embodying the change at the top. The senior leadership team isn't role modeling the change that they want to happen in the rest of the organization. The other way we see it, this failure happening, is increased teamwork and cross-organizational collaboration is preached within the organization, and yet time and time again we see senior leadership teams not collaborating and actually creating silos of their own little fiefdoms. And another way that we can see this happening as well is the organization is told to cut back on expenses, and yet we don't see the senior leadership team changing any of their special perks. And this is because most leaders greatly underestimate the impact they have on other team members simply by their actions and the way they show up. When the top leadership team is unaligned, then the organization is probably unaligned too. And I think this is so important that we understand the importance of role modeling as leaders, what great teamwork looks like, and the energy that we put behind that has a massive ripple effect throughout the organization. The P for impactful stands for presence, and presence is a rare quality in the frenetic world that we live in. We kind of live in this sound bite world, and yet being present in the moment, alert, awake, and neutral is a leadership imperative. It's an essential attribute. We can't be congruent unless we're really present. And leaders with great presence are masters at attention management. They stay focused on the task at hand. They don't get distracted by bright, shiny object syndrome, and they keep the business on course as the chief focus officer. And they know exactly what is happening and how to navigate it. So remember, on the ABCD of leadership, the A stood for attention. That was presence, paying attention to what's going on. The A of impact, second, is authentic. So our leadership ability also depends on our ability to be in alignment and to be really congruent and authentic. And this is our natural state when we feel at our best, when we're alive and decisive. And authenticity comes with a sense of genuineness, purpose, clarity, and focus. So great leaders are typically very confident in their abilities, they're self-aware, they don't act from a place of ego, but rather they live their truth. They show up as themselves rather than a version of themselves that they think others want them to be. And as a result, they are congruent and aligned in what they do. So the C of impact for our courageous impact leaders is all about connection. So great leaders are really good at building relationships and spending time with the people they serve. And in the US Marines, they call this eyeball leadership. Because when team members don't spend time with the team members they lead, they become disconnected. Team members don't feel cared for, and everyone wants to feel this sense of belonging, this sense of being cared for. That's just a basic human need. And when people don't feel like they belong, this can cause dissent and troubles in the ranks. And this is when some of the silo mentality forms that can sabotage organizational success. And finally, the T of courageous impact stands for transparency. And this is the ability to say what needs to be said and do what needs to be done. There's no skullduggery. Everyone's clear on what's happening in the organization and why. And being transparent as a leader often means showing your vulnerability. And I know that while some leaders might find this intimidating, a courageous and unbridled leader realizes that by sharing their vulnerability, they will more easily enlist the support of the team as they're seen as being human. So there's 16 characteristics there that I've shared with you about how we can lead with courageous impact. And all of these are characteristics about our being, not what we do, but how we be, how we need to show up as a leader. And I'd really invite you to go and take the Courageous Impact Leadership Assessment, which is available at www.unbridledbusiness.net/leadership quiz. Then you can see how you compare with the 16 characteristics. And then I'm welcome for you to claim a complimentary Unbridled Leadership breakthrough call with me to go through that and to see how you're doing. So we've covered a lot there today. The final thought I want to leave you with in your invitation is, how are you showing up as a leader? Are you embodying the courageous impact attributes? Are you really showing up as a leader that is able to lead an impactful team? Or is there some work that you need to do on yourself in order that you can improve your leadership skills? And if it's the latter, I'd always love to have a conversation with you. I love coaching and mentoring leaders to become the best of themselves and to bring out the best in their teams. But everything starts with you. The success of your team starts with you. So please do go and spend some work, think about that. And if you'd like some help on that journey, I'd love to help you. So there will be some extensive show notes again for today with the matrix that we spoke at the beginning of this podcast. I hope you found this useful, and I encourage you to go away this week and lead with courageous impact. Take care. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to the Impactful Teamwork Podcast. Please stay tuned for future episodes and do subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating on your favourite platform. Recommendations are essential for attracting new listeners. Please follow us on social media at Julia Felton and at Business Horsepower. And if there are any topics you'd like us to cover on future episodes, please do let me know. Remember, you and your team are always making an impact. What impact will you make today?